But why couldn't Jesus just be in your head?
He is in my head.
Well, then I don't understand what it is you're trying to tell me.
I know you don't, honey. Look.
It's been almost a decade since a surge of atheist content and highlights of Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss going viral. The sheer enjoyment we felt when we saw for the first time on the bigger screens that a professor of science goes head-to-head against average religious clerics, destroying them by facts, based on physics and biology, the only sciences that have been successful at explaining our environment and what's been going on around us. Although we never actually learned anything useful about physics in our school system, but we have somewhat of an idea of how things move, how the force works, the gravity and the angle of reflections of light. We have a formula for anything that you can imagine within our four-dimensional reality, except for human happiness and a sense of purpose. The debate over the existence of God has been a hot topic for the past 2,000 years, but only recently in the 20th century it became this huge phenomenon. The more people realize that theocracies are only there to rob their people and use religion as a sword and a shield that they can wield whenever they want, to defend themselves against criticism and crack down on the protests, and the more people were weaponized by science to attack this whole magical and at times mythical ideas of religions, we strayed further and further from those religions, to the point that today nobody is really interested in these topics anymore. Denying the existence of God, or any divine being for that matter, is so simple and brain-dead that almost any above-average elementary school kid can do it. We classical liberals take much pride on the fact that we have destroyed so much of the social constructs, and let's be honest, for the majority of time, we were on the right side of things. Liberal values brought us freedom of expression, freedom of speech and the news, empowered women, and abolished racist laws. But somewhere in the process, we have lost our sense of purpose and meaning in life as well. We have developed these sharper skills to deconstruct the stuff and beliefs. And not only we don't know how to put them back, we have failed to introduce any sufficient alternatives to the society. Well, next time you're wondering why people like Peterson are getting so much recognition and followers, and why we are continuously losing young people to different extreme ideologies, this is why. Because we humans as a hive mind have lost our sense of purpose, and end of the day it doesn't really matter if it was real or not in the first place. It's really easy to see what is happening in the Western societies right now. Despite the common belief, more and more people are turning back to religions and conservative ideas. I don't believe that's necessarily a bad thing though, but it proves us that this bipolar belief/political approach we have is not working. Flipping from one extreme side to the other might be a quick solution to a lot of conflicts in the short term, but it gives birth to new extremes and gives the opposite polars of this artificial side a lot of ammunition to use. On the other hand, yes, people are shifting towards religions, but this shift is a result of a power vacuum, a sense of hopelessness. So when a hopeless human finds refuge in religions, it's not going to be a moderate version of it. That vacuum will be filled with yet another extreme ideology in the cover of a religion. It was the natural cycle of things. For decades we told people that the only solution to your problems is the person in the mirror, that they must do more, be better, and improve themselves to finally be able to feel happiness. A systematic rat race for the most civilized and intelligent creatures ever existed, taking away the responsibilities of the state for its people's happiness. What would feed the hyper-capitalistic entities that we call our governments? What better food than hyper-individualism? If your only path forward in life is to improve yourself in an infinite loop, to make more money, reach the things that were essentially basic needs for you, if every person is blind to the objective truth that as a human in 2024, self-improvement is not your only path forward, but it is nonetheless the safest and the easiest path ahead, because there are nothing of value that we can gather around and form communities. There is nothing that we can put above our own sense of well-being, and when there are no sacrifices to be made, there are no satisfactions in sacrificing yourself for the greater good. Naturally, there are no examples of good people. It is safe to say that today depression and struggling with having a purpose in life is much more prevalent on the leftist side and in liberal societies. I'm sure there are a lot of different factors involved that can fit into a whole long video essay, but in this video we will only focus on one thing. Discussing the existence of God or a higher power is not entirely pointless. There will always be an internal conflict within us. Some might argue that no, we don't really care about that. How does the existence of a higher power affect my physical reality in any capacity? Well, I'm not sure if there are a lot of people that can actually live like that. Doesn't matter if they were born in a religious family or in a conservative society, or to a liberal family in a completely secular society. The moment you hear the word God and divinity, the vacuum has been created. You will ask questions, and even if you consciously push those questions away, you'll find it haunting you in your subconsciousness, resulting in a more egocentric approach to life. Because I guarantee you, no human being apart from the narcissistic broken people would like to be completely selfish. Selfishness comes from stupidity. Selfishness comes from a sense of insecurity and lack of faith in one's abilities to react to life. A lack of foresight into the future. A sense of mortality, wrapped in the sweet coat of ignorance. It's a defense mechanism for many. A defense mechanism that will rob you from any sense of human trust and security in your basic human relationships. And with that follows up dissatisfaction. So the only way to define happiness for a nihilistic, egocentric mind would be the endless chase of dopamine spikes, and by extension, whatever that can minimize their anxiety and fear. The infinite search for happiness and pleasure, also known as hedonism. Unfortunately for you, even evolutionary-wise, we do have this empty void in our brain for a higher power, because let's face it, for thousands of years, people who had religions always had better communities, they had more will to fight, they had less fear in death, so they survived the natural selection more easily. Imagine you have 1,000 soldiers raised on individualist, materialist values versus 1,000 soldiers raised with a fundamentalist religion, and both sides have the same weaponry. Like, it doesn't take a military genius to see through this, right? People who have no fear in death and actually see it as a reward will for sure prevail in the end. So that void does exist. Now you can be filling that with a lot of weird bullshit like being spiritual or whatever, but the truth is, it needs to be addressed one way or another. And whether we like it or not, whether it became boring and cringe or not, it is still really important to discuss God and its existence. Because even if there is no clear result at the end of a discussion, the process will be more than helpful for many to shape their own kind of faith and religion. And isn't that what an ideal free society should look like? That people believe in whatever they want to, without needing some dumb people to spoon-feed them a fanatic and unreasonable interpretation of religions? Okay, excuse me for that long intro, but it was a necessary groundwork before we talk about this underrated masterpiece of a movie. Because it's been a common recurrence that whenever I recommend watching this movie to my friends, I keep hearing the same thing over and over again. That why is this movie even relevant today with all the evidence we have against the existence of God? We are all sick and tired of debating God and fairy tales. Isn't it the time for humanity to finally move on? But Sunset Limited doesn't exactly represent religion versus science. The two characters in this movie can be somewhat deceiving for the surface level thinkers. It represents a far more humane subject, having or not having a meaning in life. It's rather presenting us with the results and the aftermath of two different set of choices that were mostly driven by two different worldviews. An ex-con who found redemption for his sins through his faith, and a professor from a wealthy and decent family who have lost himself to his doubts. Sunset Limited tells the story of a professor in his mid-50s, played by Tommy Lee Jones, trying to unplug himself by jumping in front of a train at the Sunset Limited station. After jumping, he's then saved by our second character, Black, played by Samuel L. Jackson, a janitor who was taking a train to a hospital that he works at. Black then takes the professor back to his apartment in one of the city's rough neighborhoods, and only then the cameras start rolling. The attention to details in a scene is always important in any movie with any budget cap, but it becomes a necessity when it gets to single location shows. The entirety of this movie was filmed on a portable scene that represents Black's apartment. The design of this location not only illustrates the minimalistic approach of Black to life, but it plays a role in describing the world outside of that apartment as well. Black doesn't have any expensive belongings in his apartment because he's constantly getting robbed by the neighborhood drug addicts. He doesn't hold any valuables but the basic tools he needs for his survival, and even then, they're mostly chained up to a wall or something. The simplicity of the background scene and the neutral lighting not only contribute to the discussion and our immersion in the movie, but it helps massively with tolerating the lack of scene diversity that is evident in singular location shows like this. The scenography in Sunset Limited is truly a metaphorical portrayal of human nature without its bells and whistles. How humanity stands without any sense of belonging or achievement. The bare-bone bag of flesh, a biological suit in service of a complex problem-solving system, the brain. I won't spend much more time in this section as others did a much better job covering this. If you want to learn more about scenography in Sunset Limited or scenography in general, I recommend watching this comprehensive video essay on the subject made by Watching the Aerial. Link will be down in the description. In Sunset Limited, the movie and the original screenplay, the characters never had a name. They don't even introduce themselves to each other. Black will call White the professor for the majority of the movie, and whenever he doesn't, he calls him Honey, until the professor asks him not to. For the very same reason, viewers who aren't really stimulated by the seemingly pointless discussions over religion, or think they are somewhat above having this old school debate, will never actually move beyond the surface level. It's true that White is a professor, perhaps he's a professor of practical sciences, perhaps he's a professor of philosophy, but if you just try to engage more with the discussion at hand, you will realize that the professor is not trying to use science to deflect Black's arguments, and Black is not playing dumb when it gets to lack of practical and factual evidence of the existence of God. And whenever it seems like he's doing it, it's in a playful manner, trying to inject some humor to get Professor to a smile or lower his guard. Or maybe he's just trying to show him a side of humanity that he forgot about for a long time.
You can't be happy if you're in pain.
Why not?
You're not making any sense.
Oh, there was some hard words from the professor. The preacher has fell back. He's clutching his heart. His eyes is rolled back in his head.
Throughout the movie, there are a few discussions, or rather questions, that Black asks from White that will lead to the viewer getting more information about the background of the professor's life. And sometimes Professor's answers are deflective questions from Black, so we get to know the two of them in each segment of their argument. Now, if I want to include the best parts of these two characters, I would be robbing you of the reason you need to watch this movie. So I will settle for a few not so much important segments and will try to make a point. In one part, Black asks White about his dad's job. Professor's father was a governmental lawyer. Then unfortunately he gets cancer and was sick for a while. Professor avoids seeing him despite his mother repeatedly asking him to do so. He tries to blame it on the fact that he didn't want to see his father at that estate in the deathbed. But Black successfully calls him out on his lies. It wasn't because of how sensitive Professor was or that he was trying to preserve his last memories of his late father in a good shape. We never get to know the real motivation behind his decision. But it's easy for the viewer to see that a series of life choices, a series of self-inflicted wounds on his soul is the main reason he has lost himself. Over the course of the movie, we can clearly see that unlike what Professor is trying to portray of himself in front of Black, he's indeed a broken man with a fragile ego. We see it on a segment that when Black asked him why he wanted to remove himself on this very day and what was so special about it, and Professor replies that today was his birthday, but he never actually saw his birthday as this special romanticized day. But again, it's super easy to look through him. Out of all days of the year, you wanted to do it on your birthday, and you somehow don't see the irony of it? At the early parts of the movie, Black challenges Professor on the fact that he hasn't read the Bible, and asks him how many books have you read, which he responds with,
2 a week, maybe 100 a year for close to 40 years.
Then Black tries to do the math on a piece of paper, and Professor tells him the answer in a condescending tone, which Black responds by pulling this trick.
I'm just messing with you, Professor. Tell you what, give me a number. Any number you like, and I'll give you 40 times it back.
26,
1,040.
118,
4,720.
4,720.
Yep.
The result of this quick argument is that Professor has stopped seeing Black as this simple-minded worker living in the suburbs, and learns about his past in the prison. And this scene ultimately changes the dynamic for the rest of the discussion. In two other segments, when Black keeps calling Professor Honey, he gets mad at Black and asks him not to call him that. And the other one is when Professor has had enough of Black's arguments and puts on his coat. Afterward, Black asks him why does he wear his coat like that, and Professor is so quick to respond with,
That's what, effeminate? What?
This clearly shows an insecurity in his self-masculine image. Something that, at least in my opinion, is contradictory with the mindset of a nihilist that claims all his life and all his values have lost their meaning, and now is totally disconnected from this world and its values. It shows us that this person is still in touch with their ego, and still cares about this external judgment on him, and perhaps even his legacy and the way he will be remembered. Which reminds me of a lot of nihilistic people that are seemingly so imprisoned by their negative view over life. People who are at times enraged when they see other people have their lives figured out. People who oppose positivity out of a reaction to a worldview or a religion or a school of thought that previously has failed them. People who can be seen through like a glass cannon, who are desperately in need of saving and a purpose that is not as shallow and as easily dismissible as religions. Honestly, I don't even know what I'm trying to get at here. I understand both perspectives on intellectual level and have been on both sides of this debate very often. But I guess I'm simply making an observation that a lot of people that identify as atheists and like to carry this title like it's some sort of an indicator that they are rational or smart, don't realize if they do have a void of meaning in their life, if they are humane enough to not be trapped by the shiny chains of materialism forever, they will eventually have to go through a process that will leave them devastated, and their world a reality deprived of its colors. Some might get away with it until they go through their 20s. It hits some people at the middle age, and some might actually get away with it until their very last moments. But a conflict of meaning, a conflict of value and purpose, is something that I'd rather to have figured out in my 20s than later in life. It's time for people to finally be brave enough and dissect the concept of God from religions, to understand that blindly believing in something might be stupid, but having faith, while acknowledging the reasonable doubt, having faith in a God completely isolated from these religions is arguably a much better choice. And how much of a coward you should be to give up a concept as crucial as divinity to the very same clerics that you hate. So I guess I'm trying to invite you all, whether you're out of touch with this subject or you're simply someone who is bored of this type of conversations, to take part in these conversations no matter how stupid it might sound to you at the current stage of your life. We all live through our interpretation and our personal version of reality. And no matter what is your main processing factor is, pragmatism, idealism, or whatever the hell you want to call it, life is too short to waste time, and too long to not give a fuck. May you find your purpose, and your purpose fuel your engine, so it can be both helpful to yourself and those in your vicinity. Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen, and be seeing you.